Welcome, everybody. My name's Gary Fortney, and this is The Trend. Welcome, everybody. The Trend is a weekly podcast tailored more towards the law enforcement profession, true crime, trends in law enforcement, and trends in the region, regional aspects regarding the economy, how politics may affect the economy, and how different things are going within the betterment of the citizens of the community. This is the facts without the politics. That's what the Trends line is, and that's going to be true. All right, the second episode of The Trend, we're going to talk about trends in law enforcement. What is going on with the law enforcement community? What can we do to make law enforcement more successful and to make law enforcement more productive? So today we have Lieutenant Brian Hilke, retired from the O'Fallon, Missouri Police Department and current president of Vista Law Enforcement Training and Consulting. And then we have Senior Special Agent, retired Tony Piwowarczyk from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. And we're going to throw our own aspects in trends in law enfortement. We'll each talk about our own personal thoughts and how things go regarding the current environment, let's say. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off with Brian. He's going to talk about one thing. The main thing I see is training. One thing I do want to bring up real quick. People always ask me, and I've been in ask interviews, what is one thing you could always do to make our organization better? I always say training. You can never get enough training, and you can never get enough quality training. So it's not getting training, it's quality training. So that's a big part of it. So anyways, I'm going to let Brian kick it off about the training aspects and Vista Law Enforcement Training Consulting.
Thanks for having me on, Gary. Appreciate that. Yeah, so currently we have 129 post-approved courses. As we discussed in the first episode, kind of what Vista does as far as consulting, as far as background investigations, polygraph, but I would definitely say our main focus is training. Since 2021, I think we've grown our courses from 40-ish to almost 130 now. One of the things that we try to specialize in is giving quality training. We try to focus on interactive training, not just PowerPoints and videos, death by PowerPoint we try to avoid. We try to incorporate as much interactive training because I think I can speak for Gary that the best type of training is actually hands-on training.
Absolutely. One term Brian has on the Vista website is no death by PowerPoint. And one thing that Tony, Brian, and I have been a part of is training throughout our whole careers. We've seen good training, and we've seen, how about if I use the word questionable training? So how does Vista do the training aspect different than other training entities we've seen, Brian?
Well, so in my career going on 29 years now, I've attended over 4,800 hours of law enforcement training. So like you said, I've sat through some really good training. I've sat through really bad training and everything in between. So I've tried to take what I liked and what I didn't like in my training programs and try to incorporate into our programs. And I would say probably the biggest aspect that I see is we have instructors that specialize in the topic being taught. I always hated going to classes where it was the same instructor talking about things that they haven't done in 20 years, or they don't have any specialization in the field that they're talking about. And one of the things I want to make sure that when we do training is that the person or people who are putting it on have the specialty, have the knowledge, have the experience.
I'll just build on that real quick before we go to Tony. I've been to training. I've been to numerous homicide investigation classes in my career, numerous. And you'd always see the instructor list as former commander of the homicide unit, former lieutenant of the homicide unit, former this, who are the commanding officers of the homicide unit. And even though they are the commanders, how many cases did they actually work? How many reports did they write? How many were they the lead investigator? You know what? A lot of them never. They were never a lead detective. They never wrote one homicide report. They never did one critical interrogation of a homicide suspect. They were the commander. And for them to come in and teach these classes with only a commander designation versus a detective, it makes a big difference. I was lead investigator in dozens and dozens of homicides, all right? not only homicides, but death investigations. We'll talk about that in the death part of it, where you do homicide, suicide, accident, natural, and undetermined. We went on all those and differentiate between a murder and a suicide, or an accident, okay, versus a murder. So that's a big aspect. So again, like Brian said, are the instructors qualified to teach the topics they want? I have not done a traffic stop or wrote a ticket since 1982. All right.
They had cars back then.
Well, thanks so much. I appreciate that. You're always a good voice in the background.
Well, it goes back to the horse and buggy days.
Oh, thanks. Well, you too. Okay, you started just 2 years after me. So anyways, I would not be teaching patrol stops, writing tickets. That's out of my wheelhouse, all right? As far as Tony, I'm not going to teach arson investigations, bomb investigations, or those type. I don't have the expertise. And so that's where experts come in like Tony. So Tony, what about your thoughts in the current law enforcement? And Tony brings it from two perspectives. He attended the Greater St. Louis Police Academy, as I did, and then he attended the Academy for the federal government, all right? And so we'll talk, Tony, what do you think about the training, current training?
I think a huge part is what Brian and Gary have said is you can be a generalist in a training environment. There are certain topics that can be covered by generalists, but the bulk of the topics covered by Vista is specialization. I'm trying to give you the best training in a specialized topic. And if you don't have training in that specialized topic, you can't interact with your audience, with the participants, with those that you are trying to impart your knowledge to. You're not able to answer questions confidently. And if you don't know the answer, you don't feel bad by saying, I don't know, let me check on that. Or that might have changed since the last time I did that, or let me check on the current statute. I think specialist instructors are confident in their subject matter, but they're not overconfident. They're willing to recognize and discuss when questions are brought up. And that is the big part of continuing education in law enforcement, is the ability to listen, to discuss, be open-minded, but also know your subject matter. And I think that's the biggest thing that Vista brings to the table in bringing instructors from all different backgrounds, experience levels, from federal to state to local, and bringing the training to the region, because the region needs qualified law enforcement officers out there. And people expect it. And I think departments should be held accountable to provide that training and not be the first line item cut on a budget.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is it really comes down to credibility. And that is one nice thing. I think we have a good balance as far as our 50-ish or so instructors, is we have a good balance as far as retired, current. We have instructors that have PhDs, that are forensic anthropologists, that are criminalists like Tony, fire arson investigators, death investigators. We have a good array of people that have the credibility and the knowledge that can bring that.
Well, and current topics that Vista, when it comes to active killer training and current tactics, they employ people that are in the field every day and are up on changing tactics within that. And the instructors also that are part of the classes have a background in what used to be taught.
Let me just build on that real quick. What Tony said, that's absolutely right. When I went through the police academy, as well as Tony, we're about the same time period. We didn't have what's called active killer, active shooter. We saw a threat. We determined our training at the time and how we advanced. And then all that changed after Columbine in Colorado, when active shooters killed a number of students, and it was a very horrific crime. So they just decided to come up with active shooter, active killer training. And back then, this is what it was. When you arrived on the scene, you waited for 3 more officers. You never went in by yourself. You formed what's called a tactical diamond formation, a front, left and right flank, and then a rear position. You advanced in a diamond formation. Everybody had their zones of fire, 4 people minimum, and you searched. If you saw somebody injured, you would stop, help them, provide aid to the injured, and then you would continue after you stabilized the injured. Things have changed. Brian knows a little bit more about this. Brian, what's changed? Because you are, as we all are, also active shooter instructors. What's changed regarding that mentality?
Yeah, I mean, and what's scary is that you're still seeing agencies, if we ever do an episode about, specifically active killer, and you look at Uvalde, their response was very indicative of what happened pre-Columbine. And that was
Yeah.
over 20 years ago. So you still have agencies that are still treating it not the way it should be. And, the biggest change that you're seeing now is, as far as active killer goes, if I'm the first one to show up and it's just me, I'm going in. For those that have been in law enforcement for 20 plus years, you've seen the progression from, all right, well, we're going to wait for 4, and then it went to 2. Now it's, if you show up and you're the only one, you go in and you have to deal with business.
And what about the injured? I remember we used to stop. What if you see somebody injured in the hallway? What do we do?
Sure. And that's something you're also seeing recently over the last year or so is, if we had the resources, even if I had 4 people, we would go and walk past. We would not treat. Now what we're teaching is, if you don't know where the threat is, if you're not being able to locate the active killer or killers based on intelligence, we are now stopping and actually treating them. So that's a recent change just within the last year or 2.
Well, one thing officers are doing when they come in, they have a bag, a first aid kit or tourniquets. If you're passing somebody, you can throw them a tourniquet, throw them some type of bandage, treat themselves if necessary, okay? But attacking a threat. And from Tony's perspective, Tony was trained on local law enforcement, but he was with the ATF at the time that we transitioned to active killer training and all that. Tony, what'd you get from the federal government as far as your tactical response to those type of incidents? Were you actually trained in like school shootings or things like that, or was it more mass incidents?
No, the training I received when I was with ATF, I was on our initial, we called entry control team. The first part of the SWAT component was high-risk entries. There was no training outside of the SWAT type realm on dealing with initial entry, barricade subjects, engaging in firefight, and we didn't train on and I don't think it was even perceived at that time that the world would degrade to the point of somebody wanting to go and kill kids. Gary and I are from a very different era growing up, and our intro to law enforcement, that wasn't even thought of. That who could think of that? The world has evolved to the point where it is necessary to think of that, and it's necessary to train the law enforcement officer in the mental aspect of how to deal with that. How do you tell somebody run past an injured party, somebody who's shot in the chest that's bleeding? So that has changed drastically in my 42 years, 41 years in law enforcement. And I think that it is best addressed on a state and local level that has had prior experience in that. And that's where that training needs to come from.
And, this all started talking about the specific instructor for the specific programs that are necessary. Brian, myself, and Tony, we're continuing to train. I mean, we get to go to training programs. We've all gotten additional instructor certifications, even being retired, to make sure we're current with what we teach at Vista. And Brian's big into that, making sure everybody's certified. I keep up with all the firearms instructors. Does everybody have their certifications? Everybody up to date because they expire after so much time period. Brian stays up with the taser, the OC or pepper spray, and then the ASP baton training. Who's all certified there? So we have to make sure everybody's certified on a continuing basis. So that's the first part of it. And even though we're talking about active shooter, active killer training, there's all sorts of aspects of training. Let's jump into training a little bit more of a bigger environment here. There are 3 main police academies in the St. Louis area. You have the St. Louis City Police Academy, which used to be called the Greater St. Louis Police Academy. You have the St. Louis County and Municipal Police Academy. The St. Louis City Police Academy only trains St. Louis City police officers. St. Louis County Police Academy trains St. Louis County officers as well as municipal officers in the St. Louis region. Then you have the Eastern Police Academy, which is out in St. Charles, and they train primarily officers from the St. Charles region. You also have the Missouri Sheriff Association, which also does law enforcement training. Brian, what have you heard recently regarding a regional training aspect? And we're both going to kick in here a little bit about the training.
Yeah, so there's a couple different theories or plans or tentative plans that I'm aware of. I know that St. Louis County has talked about building a new regional training facility that might include like Jefferson County, Franklin County, St. Louis County, and then I know that O'Fallon and St. Charles City Police Department have joined into a venture where they're going to have a kind of a joint regional training in St. Charles.
Yeah, and that's still in development. Actually, there's been some newspaper articles about that, about a regional training environment. I'm kind of indifferent to that right now, where it's good to be able to have multifaceted training. But how about somebody who lives in St. Louis County traveling to, let's say, Franklin County every day for training, if that's where they build the academy? And there's talk about geographically, where's this academy going to go that's going to be centralized for everybody to travel to? That's number one. That's where Vista law enforcement training is a little bit different. We actually take the training on the road. We do training in different regions of the state of Missouri where they can't afford to send their officers for overtime or travel expenses or even fuel for patrol cars. So we take the training to them, which makes a big difference. And so we'll talk a little bit more in the future about how does Vista do that as far as coordinated training in your either individual classes or as a regional part for different agencies within a county, each paying up a certain percentage. And one more thing about the training part of this. A lot of police academies set the agenda. So what that means is the academy staff picks what they think law enforcement would be interested in. So they pick the classes that's going to be part of their training for the year. One thing that Brian and I discovered is we want them to have a menu to pick from. So we have what we call a course catalog on our website where departments will look and they will pick and choose. Let's say we have regional training agreements in St. Louis County, Franklin County, and Lincoln County, and we're going to be expanding a little bit further in the future. They pick how many classes do you want, what class do you want, and what time period do you want. So they pick from the menu, hey, we'd like to focus on this or this. Or this. They pick their own. And instead of us telling them what they want, it's what do you want to train your officers? And Brian, that's been a big part, isn't it, for the training part?
Yeah, I think that's what kind of makes our training company unique is that we have this a la carte where they can pick and choose what they want, when they want it. We've even designed courses that we didn't have. We've had agencies ask, hey, can you do something on this topic? And we say, we don't have that class, but we will find the experts to be the instructors. We'll get it post-certified, and then we bring it to them.
One of those, just real quick, was a magnetometer training. We do a lot of training down for Barnes Jewish Hospital System, all their public safety officers. And they need to be trained in magnetometers, which are the metal detectors going inside. We had an expert who Brian hired, and she teaches the course. We actually hired a second instructor for all the magnetometer training. So we specialize in that training specifically, and now that's actually post-certified. We can teach that to any law enforcement agency. Tony, where'd you go to the academy at for the federal government?
The Federal Law Enforcement Training Center Academy is in Brunswick, Georgia. It was commissioned and built during Jimmy Carter's era, where he changed an Air Force base into a federal law enforcement training center. And it is, I would have to say, one of the premier training centers in the U.S. There are a number of other specialized training centers that have developed over the years. ATF has its advanced arson and explosive training at the Redstone Arsenal.
Is that in Huntsville?
In Huntsville, Alabama. And we bring that training to state and local agencies that's put on there, as well as great training there for state and local bomb techs. But then there's other components. But the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, FLETC, covers the basic education and many advanced specialized education areas for the different federal law enforcement agencies, other than FBI and DEA, which use Quantico as the base of their operations.
I've been to FLETC for training previously in my career. So they also do local law enforcement for training. And I've been there a few times for training at the FLETC. FLETC knows FLETC, okay, but everybody knows what FLETC is in law enforcement environment, right, Tony?
Yes, sir.
So we got the training aspect, different trends and different methods of training. We're advancing more and more. One of the biggest problems in law enforcement is recruitment, right, guys?
Absolutely.
What kicked off, and I'll say my own perspective here, the current negative outlook toward law enforcement officers are the biggest recruitment issue within the past 10 years?
I think it's a combination of a lot of different things. Obviously, you had Michael Brown, which was 2014. I think you have a generational change where the current generation, if we're talking about millennials or we're talking about the Zoomers, when Tony, Gary, and I probably, all of us, when we started, we took this as a profession, right? How long were you in, Tony, total?
Well, since 1982. Oh, yeah, it wasn't a job. It was a career. I was set on being involved in it my entire life. It wasn't just something to tide me over to get me to my next job.
Right. And, Gary mentioned that, 45 years for him, 39 for me, or 29 for me. So I think that's a big change that you're seeing. One of the things as a supervisor and leader that I would always do would sit down with my team and I would ask my team members, hey, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Just for career development. And I would, especially the younger group would tell me, well, I'm going to try this out for a couple of years. And if I don't like it, I'll go do marketing.
Yep.
So I think that's a big challenge. I think the media plays a big role in this.
Is it social media or mainstream or both?
Both.
Yeah.
Definitely the legacy media, your mainstream media, especially around 2020, which was George Floyd. You had a lot of riots. A lot of people look at that. And, if you look at the current trend in law enforcement, you're seeing not only can we not hire, but we can't retain, and retirements are through the roof. So there's a lot of, I don't think there's one simple explanation for the recruitment, retainment. It's a lot of different things. And it's probably one of the biggest challenges I think law enforcement's facing at the moment.
Well, I think what factors in too is the public perception of transparency. Training is paramount, and a lot of departments have shown people that training is necessary. But then the public wants to see why you did what you did, or actually want to make the judgment call themselves. That never used to be available in the print media. There wasn't live video feeds. There wasn't people with cameras out there all over. It was still photos, written articles. Now you have, in this case here, the podcast, people talking about live events as they occur. Visual aspect is so important in the media today, giving you live footage of how things happened. And then everybody doing a Monday morning quarterback that did not exist when we all started, and has come on with such incredible force and impact that we're still trying, and law enforcement trying to figure out how to deal with that. Riots started long ago, but now the frequency and the public's reaction to events in law enforcement has been magnified, because it can be seen everywhere all at once right away, and we want an answer now.
Well, what's interesting, being a college professor, I still ask on exams the basics of understanding the content I teach, but I ask a lot of the own opinions of the students. And the question I ask is, how would you increase the recruiting of law enforcement officers? And they have to answer that. I want to see their own perspective. Then I say, all right, what is the current state of law enforcement from your own perspective? And I like seeing the answers from the different college students in that respect. All right. So that makes an interesting concept of what I see. I also asked about defunding the police. We'll get into that a little bit later on. How did the people think getting rid of police will make it safer? All right. And I had a spirited discussion with some of my college students about that. All right. Well, let's talk about the video. I call it conviction by video. No use of force looks good conducted by a law enforcement officer. It always looks bad. But remember this, those of you listening, something always happens before the cameras start rolling. Nobody's taping usually during a regular traffic stop. They start taping when they see some type of use of force or encounter between law enforcement and the public. And all the people are seeing is what the use of force is, and every use of force looks bad. And the public jumps on, well, the officer's guilty of murder. The officer's guilty of this, that. And it's not true, everybody. Sure, there's some circumstance where it's happened, all right? But you need to give the benefit of the doubt to law enforcement, at least an independent view, and don't convict somebody by what they see on a video. What happened before? Was use of force justified? We have things called the use of force continuum. Was that utilized? And so that's the first part of the video. Second, I'll talk about careers in law enforcement. When I started, we had 2 people with bachelor's degrees in my academy class. I thought, oh my God, people have a bachelor's degree to be a policeman? And I couldn't believe it. I was stunned that somebody had a college degree to be a policeman, all right, law enforcement officer. Now, almost everybody in every academy class has a bachelor's degree, right? Everybody.
It's much more prominent. In fact, you're seeing a lot with master's degrees. I personally know someone who's going and getting their PhD who still works in law enforcement. So, and I think that's a good thing. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I'm one of those people who believe just because you have a degree doesn't mean that you're any smarter than anyone else. I do think there's positives to it as far as helps your writing, your critical thinking, research. But as far as law enforcement goes, I don't think it necessarily makes you a better cop, quote unquote. But I do believe that if we're bringing in people that have those critical thinking skills, that's one of the things I love about the newer generations is they ask the question why.
Yep.
A lot of us old timers don't like that. I think in the first podcast, Larry was talking about, if your sergeant told you to do something, what'd you do?
You just did it.
You just did it. And now what we're saying is, we are bringing in people that want to know the why. And to me, as a leader, that's not a bad thing, because if I explain the why, I'm getting buy-in.
A lot of us persevered in our careers after some very difficult times. Like I say, I was present for several riots and stuff. Some not just known on the local level, but like I say, when the Rodney King incident happened in Los Angeles, there were riots everywhere. The St. Louis County Police Academy was attacked when I was an instructor there. All right. And so there, it was everywhere. We got past it. Okay. We persevered, those of us that stayed in law enforcement. And then you've had some other instances that happened. Then you had the Michael Brown case. All right. Which set it all off again. That's where I believe the Black Lives Matter movement started. And then we had the Jason Stockley case, where Jason Stockley used deadly force in a situation. That'll be hopefully a future podcast. And Jason Stockley and his partner at the time were cleared. However, a new prosecutor came in St. Louis City and decided to issue charges again. And Jason Stockley was cleared after being charged with murder. It was a judge's bench trial, and he was found not guilty by the judge, and that created more riots. And then we had George Floyd, which created riots that were nationwide, okay? Again, I believe in the justice system, okay? I believe in due diligence of the criminal justice system as long as it's warranted, all right? And I believe in due process. Police and the public, there's our due process. Everybody gets their day in court. Aaron Chauvin went to court. He was convicted, and that's what the court decided and jury decided. That's the way it happened, okay? Were all the facts presented in the case? There's some questions about some facts regarding George Floyd's death that's coming out, and some appeals that Darren Chauvin's attorney is filing. Again, a future broadcast. And all those have created a negative aspect of law enforcement. Those of us that have persevered and stayed within the profession, all right, I want to use this word. It is still a noble profession, everybody. Everybody listening. Law enforcement is still a noble profession. We need law enforcement. Law enforcement officers should not get beat up for something that one officer or two officers do. We're a big profession. If you had a tooth pulled at a dentist and he hurt you because he didn't give enough Novocaine or it hurt, don't be mad at every dentist. Don't be mad at every police officer for what the actions of one or two officers are. And that's what I saw happening. And the defund the police movement really did a disservice to law enforcement. And that's created the shortages. It's created the problems with recruitment. And some young people get in there with bachelor's degrees or master's degrees. And they look at this as a job. And if they don't like it, they quit. They move on. Well, I got a master's degree. Let me go work somewhere else. Which in their mind, let's say it's understandable from their perspective. But Brian knows this, I as well as Tony. A lot of people that leave the profession, what do they want to do eventually, Brian?
A lot of them will come back.
They want to come back. They tested the waters.
And I will say too, as we talk about trends, obviously this podcast is great for what we're talking about, because, if anybody paid any attention to the most recent presidential election, most people are turning off mainstream legacy media and they're getting their news, they're getting their facts from podcasts. So hopefully, one of the benefits of doing this podcast is going to be help law enforcement in recruitment and retainment. Hopefully there's people out there that are listening that maybe, I'm not sure if law enforcement is for me. I don't know if it's a career I want to get into. Hopefully we'll be able to, as you go along, provide the facts and what the benefits, and, there's a lot of good and bad that comes with this job, with this profession. But like you said, it is very noble and we do need good law enforcement.
And like Brian said, podcasts are becoming the thing where people listen to it now, more of an independent voice and more tailored towards different things. And that's where I see the trend going. And I want to recruit young people to get into the law enforcement profession. Let me tell you my one experience I had as a police academy instructor. And every class, we always talk to the students and the recruits. If I had a recruit say, I don't know, I want to try this out. I think I'd be good at it. I want to give it a try. I would say, listen, if you don't know, get out. You don't belong in this profession. If you just think you want to try it, or I think I'll be okay, you have to have it as a passion, everybody. It's okay to go in with your eyes wide open thinking, what am I going to experience? You're always going to have different hesitations, okay, about the profession. Don't go in saying, well, if I don't like it, I'm going to quit. And so I told everybody in the class, the first day speech we give to new police recruits, if you don't think you're going to be able to take this, don't come to us for sympathy. Don't go through it. I have seen recruits go through the 1,000-hour police academy, through the St. Louis County Municipal Police Academy. One recruit never even show up the first day. He graduated, didn't even show up for work the first day. He quit. I've had recruits who quit after a month, 2 weeks, a year. I don't get it about leaving the profession. There's enough research out there from podcasts, the internet, and people sharing thoughts, right? About make sure you know beforehand. As we talked about with Sam, he's taking his time. He's getting a good handle of the profession. He's going to know when he gets into it. And he's got a lot of experience. So that the interns that work for us, they're getting a good taste of it about what they want to do. They're getting themselves set in, besides Larry. So Larry, I think, is already set in. But Larry's learned a lot about the younger culture. He's learned a lot about different people. So,
well, and I think it takes the buy-in of the individual, the commitment that he or she recognizes that it will take to be involved in this profession, believe it is a noble profession. It is something that is necessary. The confidence that they believe they can do the job and do a service to the community, protect and serve the community, and then to know there will be sacrifices that will be made along the way. It is not all medals and ticker tape parades. That's hardly ever seen. You have to know you'll sacrifice with your personal time, your time with family, your time where you live, depending upon what agency you choose to go with. Sacrifices made in your location and moving your family based
federal
upon
level, yep.
on your career choices or your department choices. But it's a total buy-in, and that comes with the original commitment of the individual that this is what I want to do and I choose to do it.
And I think part of the blame should go on law enforcement, though. I think, do we go out and go to the high schools and the colleges and tell them, these are things that if you want to be a police officer or you want to be in law enforcement, these are things that you need to do, or these are things that you shouldn't do. Tony does backgrounds, I do polygraphs, and, we will get people who have done things, as far as drug use or criminal activity. And you ask them, did you not think that you were going to be able to not do that and get hired? And a lot of times we'll get an answer where they're like, well, I didn't know. I thought it was okay to do this, or I didn't think it would affect my employment or chances to get hired. So I think a lot of it, when we talk about recruitment, specifically recruitment, I think that as law enforcement agencies, we need to extend our outreach, whether it's podcasts, whether it's going to these job fairs or going to high schools and colleges and letting them know, hey, these are things that you should not be doing. These are things that you should be doing, and selling our profession. Why is it important? That is one thing that I do love about, our intern program, is that we're getting these young people and they're finding out, hey, this is what it's about, whether they want to do it or not. And I think that's important, because especially if we're looking for people that aren't just going to stay for a year or two, and we want them to stay for 20, 30 years, especially our interns, they're getting that knowledge, they're getting that experience.
And about the training, in the class 1 counties, they have to have 1,000 hours. It used to be, when I got hired, 640 hours. And people always said, well, hairdressers and people that do cosmetologists go through more training than police. That was always, they made fun of the profession. Now it's 1,000 hours, all right? In addition to that, every police officer, law enforcement officer has to go through 24 hours of training every year to keep their licenses. We all have licenses, all right? Mine's expired. I don't plan on going back to it. I could have kept mine up, though. People keep their law enforcement licenses up. 24 hours. 3 hours are de-escalation, 1 hour de-escalation, 1 hour racial profiling, and 1 hour is implicit bias training. That's 3 hours of every year. Officers are taught, all right? But there's other topics, too, that officers mandate. Legal, skill development. They go through firearms training, actually qualification every year. And that is an ongoing process. And we do that training through the Missouri Peace Officer Standards and Training Pros. All of our 24-hour training is post-cert. We actually put a couple in, aren't we, Brian, this year?
Yeah, so I was just checking our email in between podcast, and we've gotten quite a few requests for that already.
And it's all in one consecutive row. Okay, 3 days, get your 24 hours done in one week versus doing it throughout the whole year, not getting hours. The state of law enforcement now could be better, not for the officers, but the recruitment and the quality officers. And the more the public beats up police officers and law enforcement officers, the good ones leave. And we do not want to recruit the ones that are second tier. I can't emphasize that enough. We don't want second best. And if the good ones leave, so we want the best. We want the ones. And even if you're kind of hesitant, research and talk to somebody before you go to the police academy. Talk to one of us. And we'll encourage you to, hey, take a look. We'll train you well. The academies do a great job, but we still teach at various academies, which is really important. And having people within the profession makes it better for all of us. The defund the police movement. Let me tell you a quick story. I was in my college class. I was talking about defund the police, and 2 students said, oh, yeah, that's a good idea, defund the police. I says, why? Well, then you can increase more social programs. I says, okay. I says, why the police? Well, the police is easy to defund. And we had a little bit of a spirited discussion with this student. I'm not going to say who it is. I'm not going to get more specific. And I said, why not firemen? Defund the fire department. Well, no, they go and rescue people. Why not defund the street department? We all drive cars. There was an excuse for every other place to defund except the police. And I didn't get it, all right? About where would that thought come from? Defund the police, but don't defund the fire department, the street department, the health department, which I don't want to defund any. I don't want to defund any. Has the experimented worked, Brian and Tony, about defunding the police? Look at Oakland, place like that. Has it worked?
Absolutely not.
I mean, people depend upon, civility, law and order, protectors, the strong protecting the weak. And not that as a victim you're weak, but it's that somebody has to be there to stand up for your right and then to ensure justice, that somebody is held accountable. And that exists in the civilized world and can't just go by the wayside.
Yeah, and I would say too that, I don't believe in defunding the police, but can we do things better?
Sure.
And, one of the things that I think is really good is if you look at Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. I have a friend who he just resigned from law enforcement. He has his master's as a licensed professional counselor, and they are embedding licensed professional counselors with law enforcement officers to handle these mental health crises calls. It's not where they're replacing law enforcement with just licensed professional counselors, but they're combining the two to provide the best service that they can based on the type of call.
Well, officers go through what's called CIT training. All right. CIT stands for Crisis Intervention Training. VISTA has what's called CARE training. CIT is proprietary. We developed our own training program, 40 hours of dealing with the mentally ill, dealing with domestic situations. And believe it or not, all officers are trained in this. They're trained in handling situations involving mentally ill people, involving people with, anger issues. So it's all part of the training that officers go through every year. So we do a lot of de-escalation training, which makes a big difference. I think the trend in law enforcement is improving. I really do. I think the trends in law enforcement can always be better, as Brian and Tony, I think, both agree. It comes down with training and not cutting training budgets. I don't understand why they cut training first. And I was told by a high-up person in the department, well, they look at the cost-benefit analysis of training. If we spend this much on training versus this much on another program, which is better, training or this other program? They opt for the other program. Well, training, a lack of training, is the biggest problem I see currently happening in law enforcement. That's number one. Second is a desire to get involved in the profession, all right? And third, is having a desire to get the young people involved, because it's still a very noble profession. I think all of us agree.
Absolutely, because eventually, us older folk aren't going to be around, as somebody mentioned earlier, and we need good people that are going to pick up the torch and keep civility.
I think a big part of the current trend in law enforcement is partnership. As Brian brought up, we need to make young people aware their actions, and they'll be held accountable at somewhere along the way for their choices. In law enforcement, our partnerships, we do train, but we need to extend our knowledge base to include and become partners with the mental health profession, when they're available to go out and deal with these situations that we realize we have to hand off. Number of specialty areas within law enforcement that need to be handed off to the trained professionals. And that's where the partnership comes in the training and the buy-in from the administration in law enforcement and within the public government sectors.
And I will say, too, that for those that are out there listening that might have an interest or have questions or have a desire to be a part of our intern program, please reach out. I'll let Gary give the websites and links and all that stuff. But if you're in the St. Louis, St. Charles, Franklin, any kind of on the eastern side of the state, if you're currently going to a college or university, doesn't matter if it's 4-year, 2-year, your master's, you're in your bachelor's, your associates, and you have a desire to learn more about the profession, we'd love to have you.
Yeah, the intern program, again, students who attend St. Louis Community College, they get 6 credit hours for our intern program. And that's pretty good. And you don't ever go to class, you hang with us the entire time. So,
and if they're interested, how should they reach out to?
Let's start with the Vista Law Enforcement Training website, www.vistabluetraining.com. It has our link to our email, and it has the contact information there. Please feel free. Or you can also go through the Trend podcast at www.trendmediallc.com. It'll have a link also to the email system for Trend. And I want to thank Brian and Tony for getting kind of a perspective. This is going to end our second episode talking about law enforcement trends. Remember, subscribe. So thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in episode 3, which is going to discuss the Pam Hupp and Shirley Newman investigation. So thank you so much for listening. Thanks, everyone, for tuning into this episode of The Trend. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please feel free to reach out to us at the Trend's website at www.trendmediallc.com, or you can email us at any time at thetrend@trendmediallc.com. We welcome everybody's comments, suggestions, or reviews. Don't forget to stay connected with us on social media. Follow us on TikTok and Instagram at Trend Media Podcast, and join the conversation on Facebook by searching the Trend Podcast. Check out our Amazon page through the link on our website, where you'll find some of our recommended products. If you've enjoyed this episode, consider supporting us by donating $5 to our Venmo account at the Trend Podcast. So every little bit helps. Thank you so much for donating. If you're interested in doing so, we really appreciate it. We'll be back next time with more true crime stories, insights on law enforcement trends, and current trends with our region and the people we serve. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay part of the Trend.